Welcome to the show, Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain. I am delighted to be joined by the wonderful Jamie Thomson today on the show. Welcome, Jamie.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ruth. And I like to be pleased to be described as wonderful.
Well, I know we had a lot in common and we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm really excited to get going. But for those that don't know Jamie, he's an ex-professional footballer. He's ex-Royal Navy sailor. And now a successful entrepreneur in the area of sport, exercise, health and well-being and biotechnologies. He's passionate about helping people understand the easy things they can do to benefit their health. Woohoo! I think that's so important, whilst also driving awareness of cellular health and redox biology in the UK and around the world. And I think there's so much that we have in common for so many reasons. So I'm really looking forward to the chat. But before we dive into your story, I'd love to know what you are passionate about in life right now.
So thank you for having me, firstly, Ruth, and thanks for the great introduction. What I'm most passionate about, I guess, without wanting to sound too corny, is helping people. As you've described there, I have some insight to some things that unfortunately isn't more common knowledge in the UK, as well as a history of using sport and exercise, for the reasons of benefiting mental health and wellness that I'm very passionate about. And through the work that we do via my businesses and with social prescribing and the work I do representing a company called ASEA Redox, I'm aware of some things that can help a lot of people. And it's surprising sometimes how easy and simple these steps are that we can introduce to people's life that makes such a profound effect. So yeah, that's where my passion lies, really wanting to help the world, help the UK especially, find out about these things that I want to share, of course. So this is a great platform to enable me to do it.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's so important because although we're kind of awash with information, in the digital age, often people aren't aware of the opportunities that they can take to enhance their well-being outside the traditional framework of the NHS, like we have here in the UK, or the system that they have in the States. And I think it's so important that we do raise awareness as to how we can empower other people to really not only improve but really optimize their health and well-being. Particularly, I'm super love the emerging desire for social prescribing and using the community to help people really enhance their performance or enhance their health and well-being. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation, particularly in the context of this emerging technology redox, which is fascinating. But before we really start, what for you is optimal brain health in the context of your life's journey?
I would say it's a really good question, and obviously, as we've alluded to, there's, I guess, many ways that you could look at this. For me, it's the sharpness. For me, I've always having a background in sport and now obviously business. There is an element of being on the ball that I need and I appreciate, and I have experienced in my life the lack of that, if you like, the fogginess, if you like, the less clarity of thought. I'm aware of certain dietary changes and things or environmental factors that have clouded my optimal cognitive function, if you like. And now, thankfully, I'm aware of that, and I use something that enables me to have that clear, focused, functioning. So I don't want to lose that. I very much want that, like you said, for the rest of my life. And so for me, optimal brain function is sharpness. You know what I mean? It is that ability to focus in on what it is you want to focus in on right away, because I'm aware that isn't the case for everybody. And I've experienced personally how, like I say, you can be a bit cloudy and you can lose that ability to be really present and switched on and engage with what it is you're doing. So that really means a lot to me.
I can really relate to that. And I don't think anybody's mentioned sharpness in the context of what optimal brain health is for them personally. And I think what I find so important about your point on sharpness is there's so much within our power to enhance the sharpness in our mind or the
Mm.
mental clarity that we're experiencing that perhaps we're not even aware of. One of the things that I've been super cognizant of recently in terms of enhancing my mental clarity is the importance of fasting,
Mm.
and how food or the absence of food in particular in this instance can really enhance my mental clarity, and I'm not being swamped by the digestive
Mm.
down downturn that we experience when we're digesting food that reduces my mental clarity. So I do think it's so important, and there's so much that we can do personally, to enhance it. Could you take us back to a time when you really didn't have that mental clarity or that sharpness, where your world was really foggy or cloudy?
Yes, so I think to touch on the point you made just before I do, I think you're right. I'm a big advocate of fasting. It ties into my knowledge that I want to share around cellular health and things like, because everything's made of cells, so everything comes down to that in essence. But so yes, I agree that there's some tools and some things people can do definitely. But going back to my personal experience, yes, I mean, I don't want to paint my time in the Royal Navy as in a bad way, because there's a lot of good that came out of my time in the armed forces. But I was a younger man, like I say, and I hadn't learned some of the things I've learned now. And due to environmental factors, stresses, and what I will say is partly a poor diet. Um, I found myself, yeah, just I was still, it's just a diluted version of what you could be, you know what I mean? And I
Mhm,
just felt that, and even I was conscious of it, you're aware in the moment that, oh, I'm not firing on all cylinders. And it seems like it's just out of reach a lot of the time. And that was how I felt a lot of the time, especially when I would be away in the Navy, when you're on board, I was on Type 23 frigates, majoritively in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf. And so, yeah, different things: heat, lack of sleep, poor diet, just all these environmental factors that played into that. And I just felt, like I say, you could almost watch time slip by, or days go
mhm,
by, and not really feel like you were there, and that's the thing that I'm really, I'm a big advocate of meditation, being present, really taking the time to be here and now. And yeah, I have such a value to that, because of the fact that I feel like I've almost lost out on time sometimes, where it's passed you by and you've not really been in the
mhm,
moment so much. So
mhm.
yeah, that's the time that comes to mind when you ask that question, for sure.
Mm. And I think it's a really good point that you mentioned there, because often people think like there's a one fix for sharpness. If I'm losing mental clarity, then there's going to be one magic pill that's going to improve it. But actually, it's a whole system of issues
Oh.
that tend to be causing the problem. Like you mentioned, diet and the environment that you're in, heat and so on, that all individually might be seen as a minimal impact, but collectively it can have a huge impact on your cognition and your mental clarity. And in order to enhance your sharpness that you're looking for, you have to address each thing one by one. You
Mm.
can't just do it. You can't just apply a pill and hope that's going to fix the problem, because it's not. It's not. It's going to mask the problem, and you're not addressing the root cause. So I think that's so important. And when did you notice that, you're kind of wading through the soup and you didn't
Yes.
have the clarity that you needed? When did you realize that you needed to make that shift and that you could make that shift yourself personally?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific moment. It's just, one of the things I described recently was, it's this is going to act as a metaphor with arthritis. So I had arthritic pain in my hands, from all my years of boxing and doing sports. And recently, as I'm going to touch on, I'm sure, as the conversation progresses, I use a supplement that now enabled me to increase my cellular function and
Mhm.
relieve any pain that I was experiencing. However, I didn't notice when it left. I
Ah,
to test this product out, I stopped using it, and certain pains returned to me, some very familiar pains that have been with me for years. And it was only when things returned that I noticed what something was doing, if you see what I mean. And it's kind of similar here with the clarity of thought. You know, thankfully, I'm in a position now where I know what to do. Like, I've got a great relationship now with my body and how I function, and like I say, and that applies to mental functioning as well. And so I've played around with things. I mean, I've got a 1-year-old son, so we've been through the last 12 months, or well, he's nearly 2. So the last 18 months of sleepless nights, and I know how, when things present in life, like I say, if you have a stressful period, that it does impact here, or it affects you there. Like you said, the knock-on effect of things. So it's in witnessing things go back to where they were that I realized how far I've come moving forwards. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important point, and I can really relate to it from something completely different. Is one for me, we went on an elimination diet to understand what I was intolerant to, and it's
Okay.
typically gluten and dairy. And I recently cooked some bread with some gluten, which was raw, and both my husband and I had really terrible indigestion issues. Um, but we would, if we hadn't have reintroduced it back in
Yeah.
to see what it was like, we wouldn't have realised how. I mean, so bad it was terrible last night. We wouldn't want to be in the
That's
house.
a great
But
example because yeah, I get it entirely.
and I think it's important to notice that, isn't it? That often we make these shifts in our life and we forget how, because it kind of creeps up on us, the changes that we experience, that we don't appreciate how far we've come when we implement those changes. And it's to recognize that fact that making a small shift, like an introduction of a supplement, for some people it might be omega-3, can have huge impact on your performance in terms of reducing inflammation and joint pain. um, can have a huge impact, and when you take it out, you really notice the pain that you were experiencing comes back again.
Oh goodness, yes, yeah, I couldn't agree more. But like I say, I think without this wanting to sound as though younger people can't experience this, I do think for me personally, there was a process. Like,
Yeah.
you can only learn things through experiencing them, and don't get me wrong, I try and teach as much as I can with what I share with people, but I do think some things have to be experienced. And for me, I don't think I could have had this amount of knowledge and understanding at an earlier age. I had to go through it to get the understanding.
Yeah, do you know, I think that's so true. And sometimes, it doesn't matter how many times you tell uh, a younger person, because we're going through that stage of development. I'm just reflecting on myself now. We all get told that alcohol's not good for you when you're younger, but you don't quite appreciate, completely ignoring, don't quite appreciate it, how bad it is for you until you take the time to eliminate it from your system,
Mm,
and understand the cognitive performance enhancements that you can achieve when you do,
mm.
and the pain that you experience when you put it back in. So I think it's so important that we give youngsters a little bit of grace, um,
Yes,
because we all have to go through our own learning journey, and that's different for everybody at every age.
I
So
agree.
I'd love to know, you're an ex-footballer. What kind of what led you to not becoming an ex-footballer? I mean, not becoming a footballer, or coming away from the professional side of life, and how did your journey evolve to where you are today?
Okay, so I'll try and be as concise as I can. So my professional football experience isn't quite what maybe people listening to this might be thinking. So you might be thinking Manchester United, or Arsenal or something like that. No, I played briefly for Cheltenham Town, who are in League One now, aren't they? But they were in League Two at the time, so it was
Okay.
very close to conference level football, and obviously not at the levels you see on Match of the Day. Nevertheless, as you've mentioned, that didn't pan out. Now, I sometimes not regret, but I talk to people about the importance of holding on to dreams and passions. I'm very driven to follow my passions now, but I do feel as though I maybe let that go, and went down a different career path where I could have maybe continued, as you've alluded to, but I wouldn't be where I am now if that had been the case. So yeah, I left professional football. I was 18, I think, at the time, and that led me to join the Royal Navy, as we've
Uh-huh.
mentioned. I spent close to 6 years in the Royal Navy, and my conviction when leaving the Navy was that I knew what I wanted to do, but even if I couldn't do that, I had to do things in life that I found excitement in. Things that I really would want to do if I was getting paid for it or not. You know what I mean? Because I
Mhm.
didn't want to, wake up and be 60 and realize that I've done something that I didn't actually enjoy or love for however many years in my life. So for me, I know there's there's the reality, the fact you've got to pay the bills, but I really was convicted in following passions and things that even if they didn't pay well, they ticked another kind of important box for me, internally. And thankfully, I'm very lucky. I've got my businesses that enable me to use sport and exercise to help people with, as we've mentioned, through social prescribing, which is all
Mhm.
manner of health reasons people get referred, be it mental health or physical health challenges, and we use light exercise activity, socialization, and different courses that we run to help people see how you can use activity and exercise to benefit your health and well-being.
Mhm.
We also work with children in schools, and I'm very keen on using sport to teach life skills through the work that we do in PE and PE lessons
Mhm.
in schools. But then, as I've mentioned, I also represent an American biotech that are bringing to the world a breakthrough health technology that's being considered as significant as the discovery of penicillin and is still a world's first. And so all of that combined just enables me to, like I say, remember that I only follow passion, you know what I mean? And I only do things that excite me. And thankfully I can still say that's true now because yeah, I've never been more passionate or excited about what I do than I am now.
Mhm. And what drove you initially into social prescribing and sports? Was that driven from your footballing career, and you
I,
pivoted from that, or did you pivot from the Navy, or
it was a bit of both actually. Yeah, I've always been a big advocate of exercise being used for other things. So, like I don't mind sharing that. Obviously, whenever I've had any mental health issues or or being in a bad place, I've found that sport, exercise, even group exercise would help break the cloud, you know what I mean? And I think more and more people are being aware of the fact that we all have mental health, and some days are good, some days aren't so good,
Mhm.
some days, or sometimes you can be in a really bad place for a sustained period, like you can with
Yeah.
physical health. And sometimes you just need something, a tool to help you move past that. And so I've always used exercise in that way for myself personally, through just being ingrained in sport for my whole life.
Mhm.
But but no, I came into social prescribing because I I learned about it. I saw how it was moving forwards, and I saw how it just tied into everything that I'm so passionate about. And
Mhm.
so we thankfully have a community interest company, Supersport Southwest CIC, that's enabled to obviously apply for grant funding. And thankfully, the National Lottery supported us in our want to run a pilot project to show what we could do in that hemisphere or that sphere. And yeah, and thankfully it was really well received. We've now obviously built on that and do more. We've got some really good contracts with some local PCNs and GP surgeries.
Mhm.
Responses are just phenomenal, and it's really pleasing to see that what you're passionate about isn't just for you, like it's being received the way that you want it to, and you can share that kind of personal belief that these things can help with people who maybe don't share that belief, but after a period of time with us suddenly then do because they see what it does for them.
Yeah, and do I think it's so important to get people involved in exercise, or sometimes it's seen as a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? So, movement,
Mm,
to enhance their health and well-being, because we can be so sedentary,
mm,
in today's world, spending most of our time behind PCs, and it's so important that we get that opportunity to really tap into what we're innately capable of doing, which is moving our bodies, and have
mm,
to move our bodies in order to regenerate our bodies, and also
mm.
make sure that we get the best out of our bodies and our minds as well. So
Yes.
I love that. I'd love to dive into the technology that you have dipped your toe in and that are now
Yes, yeah,
fully
I'll
immersed
just
in.
like literally demonstrate what this is on the screen, but I'll talk some more, of course.
Yeah. How did you hear about it, and what inspired you to get involved in the first place? And then we'll dive into the technology itself.
Yeah, well, again, this relates to football. An ex-Manchester United player that I know in the US, a man called Dave Bradley, reached out to me. Well, okay, so long story behind this. I can't sit still. Lockdown was a bit of a torture for me, you know, being told you can't go out and work, you can't go and see people, but people I know that were desperate for our work, but we were having our hands tied. So the best thing I thought we could do was kind of, as you've done, host a podcast,
Yeah.
which enabled us to at least connect with people virtually and have the similar conversations around sport and exercise and how they can benefit health and well-being via conversations. And it was really well received, and I really enjoyed it. One of the people I wanted to get on was Dave, because he's an ex-Manchester United player now living in the US. We connected and got on really well. We never actually got him on our podcast, but he and I had a number of calls and Zooms just to get to know one another. And he was the man that just said, "Look, have you heard of this before?" Because he's in the US where he knows of it, many do, but I hadn't, and I realised that nobody had in the UK. And it was, I mean, just to give people a bit of understanding, it's the world's first and only cell signalling technology or supplement that sits in the field of redox signaling. I'll break it all down in a moment.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, because of my background in sport, because of my want to always further my knowledge as to how to maximize this body, this thing that we have that we're walking around in, I wanted to learn more. And I've got to admit, I started from a point of skepticism, which I have no opposition to. I love skeptics because they'll question things and they'll, you know, follow the information. Cynics obviously it would dismiss, but skeptics at least will follow the information, and that's what I did. I read the studies, I learned about the history of the product, the validation from the third party labs, the trials that have been done, and I realized it was unlike anything I'd seen before. And I'd spent, you know, a lifetime in sport with all manner of supplements coming and going through, you know,
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
doors. And so, yeah, it was just intrigue that led me to learn about it. But then, you know, I saw some things that I couldn't unsee, and I'm one of those people that, I don't know, different people, you know, everybody's different. Some people, when I introduce this to them, they love it. It has great results for them, but they keep it to themselves, and that's completely fine. I don't begrudge anyone that. But when I know what this can do, and then I hear that a friend's mum has got diagnosed with something, or somebody's just suffered a really bad injury, or brain health, whatever it might be, I can't not tell people, because I'd hate to know that I could have helped and I chose not to. So I went on a mission to try and help people find this, help the UK learn about this, because it's still very, very, very underrepresented here in the UK, despite being a 14-year established company in technology with all this science to back it all up. And so that's what I've been tasked with now, in partnership with the company ASEA, is to find
Mhm.
others in the UK that can help drive the growth of this and the awareness of this here in the UK.
Mm. And I'm really excited about it, because being a comms officer in my reservist capacity, is communication is everything.
Yes, it
Because it's
certainly
very
is.
easy to look at just systems or cells in isolation,
Mm.
and not look at the communication channels that are necessary to ensure those cells function. So I'd love for you to dive. I've given a very high overview of that in the context
No,
of comms, but I'd love for you to dive into it, would you, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit in how the science works, or how it
yeah.
actually physically works in our body.
Yeah, of course, and I love the metaphor, if you like, and you're right. The human body is probably the most complex communication network on Earth, and so something that amplifies that communication is obviously going to be well received. I normally do just quite a basic narrative at this point, so I'll do that and jump in if you need me to stop.
Yeah, yeah.
This narrative begins in '98, actually. Well, predates my involvement with this company, of course. But in 1998, a double Nobel Prize was awarded for not the discovery, but the understanding of what these certain molecules within the body do, these signaling molecules. And so what was learned is that redox molecules and other signaling molecules within the body enable cells to communicate with neighboring cells. They go a lot deeper than that as well in terms of gene expression and DNA, but this is essentially understanding that these molecules that are produced at the point of ATP creation, which
Hmm.
pre-98 were thought to be a waste product. I mean, it's a bit naive to think we've got trillions of these molecules in every human on the planet that are doing nothing, that were a waste product. But what was learned in 98 is that they're not a waste product. In fact, they're probably as important as the ATP that's created at the same time, which is to enable cellular communication and gene expression, etc. It's estimated without redox molecules in your body, you die within 3 seconds. So,
Wow, that's really key.
yeah, yeah, don't worry, you're not going to lose them all overnight or
No, but
anything.
I mean, I think it's really important that they're considered a waste molecule, and
Oh,
actually
yeah.
without them, we'd die in 3 seconds.
Yeah, that's what's been learned since 98, of course. But what was also learned in 98 is worth mentioning is that post puberty, we lose our production of these molecules at about a rate of 1% a year. I mean, without wanting to sound too morbid, we're all programmed to start aging from puberty onwards. We're all
Mhm,
slowly declining. You won't feel it at that age, of course, but by the time you get to your late 30s, early 40s, you're starting to appreciate that you are aging and things are slowing down. And so, what happened at post that Nobel Prize award was that a biotech race ensued to see if anyone could do what was deemed impossible, which was to stabilize these molecules outside the body. Inside the body, they're classed as reactive oxygen species. They're very fleeting. They're used within
mhm,
split seconds because they're where they need to be and they're used for that function. So obviously, stabilizing them outside the body was deemed to be an impossible feat. But an atomic medical physicist by the name of Dr. Gary Samuelson achieved that feat, and he stabilized them. I don't know how how he did it, but obviously it's all patent protected. The trade secrets and all that behind it verify what this is, and thankfully it's all third party validated now that it's
mhm,
produced on a large scale. And so the company I now represent hold that technology. They're the only company in the world that still have the patents and the technologies to produce stable redox signaling molecules that are native to the body. They're already in us outside the body. These molecules are made from the cellular environment, saline, sodium chloride, hydrogen, and oxygen.
mhm,
And so when you use this supplement that I've held up, you're
mhm,
returning to your body the very molecules it already knows, it already produces, but it just produces less of than it may be used to. And so you don't digest or metabolize this once it's into the bloodstream, which it will get absorbed even in the mouth as you consume it, and also via the mucosa and the
mhm,
dietary tract. It'll then just be into the bloodstream, and the body will put it to use where it's needed. And what we see is that, as you're probably aware, when you have oxidative stress or any sort of illness or injury or disease within the body, there are neighboring cells that are still healthy, signaling for immune response, inflammatory response, or whatever the
mhm,
body needs to do. And all this does is it amplifies the Wi Fi signal within the body. It enables that signal to be heard loud and clear, fast and efficient. So the body, this doesn't perform any miracles. It's your body that does, but it just
mhm,
empowers your body to operate more efficiently. And we see some amazing things, of course, around some very significant health challenges. And I'm aware that we have to be compliant because of the fact this isn't a drug, so we can't make medical claims. We can't claim this is a cure or a treatment for anything.
mhm,
But we see some amazing things. And yeah, like I say, this is 14 years. This has been around in the US and around the world. It's just the UK hasn't really grasped it as yet. And that's where
mhm,
my want comes in, because I don't want people in the UK to not know what is out
mhm.
there.
I think it's so important though to recognise it's an enabler on the
Yes,
battlefield. So it's an essential enabler. Like you say, if you don't have communications between all of your respective, I'm just going to use a
I
military
love the metaphor.
analogy,
No, please.
all your respective soldiers across your battlefield that's going on in your body, whether that's battle of inflammation, a battle of whatever it happens to be. Normally, the root cause is, there's inflammation somewhere in your
Mm,
body. It is to make sure that your soldiers that need to get the vital equipment or the vital weapon systems to fight that battle, get it efficiently and effectively, so your logistics chain is working super well.
mm,
um, but you're communicating with all of your commanders across the different parts of your body so that they send the right equipment, logistics send the right equipment, the soldiers know how to use the equipment, all of
Exactly.
that.
Oh.
It's the comms, isn't it,
Oh, it's
across
a
the
superb
whole
analogy.
system.
It's a really good metaphor, and I think you're right. It is. It's that in essence. I mean, I mean, most people are aware that every human body produces, unfortunately, cancerous cells and different things. Oxidative stress is going. If you imagine that battlefield, but larger than anything you can imagine, because we're talking of trillions and trillions of cells, and every now
Yeah,
and then a little fire pops up somewhere. Now, if it's not dealt with, it can spread and obviously cause an issue. But if the signal's loud and clear from the person who spots the fire to the team that have got the tools that are needed to put out the fire, that's the immune system, let's say,
yeah,
they can come and bring what's needed, quickly put that out, it turns to nothing. But if it's
yeah,
left undetected for a long time or the signal isn't loud and clear, that
yeah.
spreads. And before you know it, it becomes something very significant.
Yeah, you've only got 1 bar on your phone rather than 4 bars or 5
Again,
bars,
another
so
great analogy.
and, I'd love to know if you can share some stories, please, around this, because what I find super fascinating about this is because it is a communications system that an enabler enhances everything that goes on in your body, is that it's complementary to all of the nutritional supplementation that we do. It complements all interventions because it supports the communication channels and amplifies it. So could you just give some some insights into what you've seen, some case
Yes.
studies that you've observed or you've witnessed?
Yeah, and just before I do, to touch on that point, you're 100% right, and that's why I'm so passionate about this, is because this, medication, nutrition, this complements it, as you've said. And how we describe that as another metaphor is that, if you're on a building site, you want to create a structure, you get the materials, of course, you need and if you can get the best materials, of course, you're going to build a better house if you've got the highest quality sand and cement and bricks and all this.
Mhm.
If you don't have the labor to put it to use, then they're just going to sit there as a pile of bricks. And thankfully, this is the first time you can supplement that side of it that puts things to use. And so, obviously, if you complement this with good nutrition and good diet and other things, you'll be putting those things to use as best as you can. But anyway, to go back to the original question, I reached out actually because knowing we'd have this conversation, to a lady called Danielle Matthews, who I can introduce you to another time, Ruth, who
Oh, I love that.
her story is around brain health and what this did for her. Now, obviously, I've got a number of stories around a number of different health challenges, a lot that are closer to home than Danielle's is, because she's in the US. Some of my close friends have had some very significant results, but I'll just share with you Danielle's story. She was hit by a drunk driver and
Wow.
suffered, obviously, a severe, well, brain injury that after being released from hospital, and she was, I think she was in a coma for a period of time, she was diagnosed with post-concussive syndrome, or I can't remember the name of the condition that she was suffering with, but it amounted to her lack of focus, couldn't, literally, if there's any background noise in any environment, she couldn't operate or just be in that environment, because the fact that there was too much going on, too much stimulation, but at the same
Mhm,
time she couldn't hold a focus to what it is she did want to do. And she spent 2 years, I think it was, in a position of continual migraines, this lack of ability to focus, but at the same time overstimulated by all the exterior. She couldn't listen to music because there's too much going on in one piece of music. Three or
mhm,
four instruments was too many for her to comprehend. And she spent 2 years in this position with, this severe kind of condition, to the point where her specialist had said, "Look, whatever healing your body's going to have achieved, it's achieved now. This is your new normal." And she couldn't accept that,
no,
unfortunately.
I don't blame her.
No, no, I think it's a, yeah, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I hate to imagine what that must have been like, but nevertheless, she went on a bit of a mission to find what was out there, and she's literally phoned me yesterday and explained that when she was introduced to this, she thought, as many do, as I did, that it's too good to be true. You can't, produce these molecules and they have this much of an effect, and because it's produced from saline, I think it's a load of rubbish. But anyway, her mother and father said, "Look, we'll buy it, you just use it." And they'd seen some amazing results, her mother and father. So she she actually said to me that she agreed to do it to prove them wrong, because she was adamant that they were getting, mistaken, and it was a placebo effect that they were feeling. But nevertheless, she stuck with it, and yeah, anyway, massive differences over obviously a period of time. It's always worth remembering and reminding people of this. This isn't a cure, this isn't a treatment, and so you're empowering the body to heal, and that takes time. Sometimes there's a process involved, and the body doesn't just flick a switch and suddenly everything's put right. It has to work to put things right. But yeah, she saw that her migraines went after, I think she said, like something like 30 days. Then she started witness, and now you wouldn't know she'd had any issues. I mean, I've met her. We met in Las Vegas last year. She's an amazing woman with so much energy and just so vibrant and full of. She was speaking on the stage in front of 3,000 odd people in Las Vegas about her
Wow.
journey, and she's thankfully done very well in sharing this with, well, as you'd imagine she would, with her story. Um, but yeah, she's completely and 100% recovered, and I've seen the car that she was in, and that's a feat in itself when you've seen the accident she emerged from. So yeah, her story was very moving. But then she's one of hundreds of thousands, and that's what frustrates me to some degree, is that those people should come from this country sometimes, but
Mhm.
unfortunately we've only shared it with a handful of people so far.
Mm. And do you have any other story? You mentioned stories a bit closer to home. Do you have any stories you're authorised to share from a bit closer
Yeah,
to home locally? Because her story sounds fantastic, and obviously she's shared it
yeah.
to in Las Vegas, a wonderful place that I've been to as well. So, um, are there any stories that you can share close to home in the UK that people
Yeah,
can
yeah.
hear
So,
about?
I mean, there's a number that spring to mind. My friend Joe, um, he unfortunately, when before I was even introduced to this, he had cancer, unfortunately, and he was left as a result of the cancer paralyzed from the waist down, because the cancer he had was in his spine, and although it's a rare place for it to originate, it wasn't actually a rare form of cancer. It's just unfortunate where it was. Anyway, I didn't have ASEA at this point. I know what this can do around that disease, but like I say, it wasn't the case, and I only was introduced to this after Joe was released from hospital. And when he came back, he's shared this with many people, that his battle to deal with the the recovery from the chemo, radiotherapy, surgery, the paralysis, the functioning of his body and how it had changed internally post surgery was a bigger battle, he says, than the cancer itself, which,
Mhm.
like I say, I think you can comprehend, but it's hard to imagine sometimes because we all hear cancer and think the worst. But nevertheless, this was his journey. And after he was released from hospital, his body reached like a saturation point of healing. Like he had pressure sores on hips and his
Ah.
sacrum that he just couldn't heal. They'd been there for months and months, and he had district nurses coming out to him, changing the dressing every couple of days. They were on a rota, so it would be one for 2 days, then another one for 2 days, and so on. And it went on for months, and these wounds weren't healing.
And then
Circulation.
I just want to pause you on that, because I've worked in the healing space, previous company that I was working for, and it's very distressing
Oh,
for the people that have the wounds to have open sores and wounds. It's very labour intensive to keep
mm,
going out and dressing the wounds and making sure that the dressing needs to be appropriate to support wound healing as well.
mm.
So the cost implications of that, and the emotional implications, and economic
Mm.
implications for that person can be huge, as well as the mental health challenges that they might experience on
Well,
top of all of that.
I'm glad you've mentioned all of that, because I think sometimes when you say, Joe's recovered from cancer, but pressure sores are the issue, it seems as though it's not as significant, and yet you're right. It's not just a physical thing. It gets you down, like I say, and it did Joe, because he spent months. He's survived. And that should be a celebration, and yet he's probably feeling worse after everything than he was pre diagnosis. So yeah,
And
he was.
also, I'm sorry, I just want to pause you, because I just want to dive in on this. Is his cancer was the primary focus, but then he had a secondary issue as an outcome of the treatment of the primary issue.
Mm.
And that can be hugely wearing on the body
Yeah.
because you created a secondary problem that wasn't previously there.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So this was his life, and I think, 5 or 6 months may have passed, and he was, in this position. And like I say, I saw him quite regularly, and I knew how it was affecting him. And it was one of those dilemmas that I was in because I'd not long been introduced to ASEA. I'd previously given it to my mother and father. They saw some really good results. My friend Martin, who had been discharged from the Navy
Mhm.
with chronic back pain, he'd seen amazing results, and what it did for him is another story. But I was reticent to share with Joe because I didn't want him to think I was trying to, take advantage of his plight and where he was. But at the same time, I resided to decide that I couldn't not say anything. I'd rather him, get offended at my offering than me not offer at all. Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah, of
what I did,
course.
thankfully, was me and another associate with this here got a number of free samples to give to him, and not enough to sustain him for a long period of time, but enough for him to at
Yeah.
least trial the products and see if it helped. And thankfully, he witnessed. He's one of the people we often see. The more pronounced your health challenge, the quicker you see the results, because that's where the body's prioritizing the healing anyway.
Yeah.
So within 4 days, he had witnessed. He'd felt the benefits of this and what it was doing. But the most like kind of comprehensive kind of description I can give is that those district nurses that were on that rota, when I think let's say he started on the Monday, and by the following Thursday, when the district nurse had come back to him, say they they were all then asking, "What have you done? What have you done differently in the last 10 days or 7 days, however
Mhm.
long it was since they last saw him?" Because his pressure sores started healing so fast that this is gonna. I'm sorry to get a bit graphic here,
No,
but
no, it's fine. Just a health warning for people
okay, so
listening.
one of his sores, he had like an under the skin infection, and
Uh-huh.
they had to actually keep that sore open to enable the infection, let's say, to escape or to come out,
Yeah.
even though his body had got to the point where it was ready to heal it now. And this
Mhm.
was 3 sores in the space of 2 or 3 weeks, had gone from open wounds, as you've described, for months to gone. Like I say, and one of them had to be kind of helped to stay open so that they could get the let's say pus or whatever it was out of him
Mhm.
before enabling the wound to close fully. And so that was like right in front of our eyes. We're seeing this happen, and so it was for me, like, a very poignant and visual description of what this is doing. And that's worth mentioning with this because often we don't visually see when you introduce people to this, it's always, well, how do you feel? And you don't witness, your liver functioning improving if you have a liver issue, or your pancreas, or wherever these molecules are being put to use internally. You don't
Mhm.
see it. You just hope they're doing what you want them to do, and you hope your body's recovering, and then you start to maybe feel a bit better. But for Joe, we could actually sit there and watch and see over a period of a couple of weeks what was going on and how his body was responding.
Mm.
So
Do you know, I love you that you shared that story, because I can massively relate to it, from the work I've done previously on looking at wounds, but also because it opens up the opportunity, doesn't it, for people so many thousands of people, whatever age may happen to be, who have chronic wounds
mm,
that are not healing properly, the opportunity to empower their own bodies to potentially heal faster.
yeah,
But also, for people with compromised immune systems, of which there are many, and let's just look at, the situation they're experiencing with COVID and long COVID, is where people are very vulnerable from a immune system compromise, as he would have been
he would
himself,
have been.
having
He
had
was, yes.
cancerous uh, cancer therapy. That although your immune system may be compromised, it's still there.
Mm,
And if you give it a little bit of helping hand, that is a natural helping hand and not something that's going to induce even more side effects, which is often the case with some of the medical interventions that people like let's just take cancer and
Mm,
chemotherapy. That's, it's probably the most harmful in the person, as well as, killing the cancer. It absolutely
mm.
depletes you. But an approach that can actually amplify your own internal immune system mechanisms, to help those that are compromised to experience an element of recovery that would never have been possible.
Precisely, and that's the beauty of this. As you mentioned there, this is native to the body. It even goes beyond natural. Blueberries are natural, but your body doesn't produce blueberries. You know what I mean? You still
No.
have to break them down and take what you can out of them, and then obviously process the rest as waste. Whereas this, none of it's waste. It's all already in you. Your body knows what it is, so it doesn't have to break it down. It doesn't have to digest it. It's absorbed into the bloodstream and just put to use. The closest way I describe it to people is that it's similar to blood. If you need a blood transfusion, as long as you get the right type of blood, A negative, B positive, whatever you
Yeah.
are, as soon as it's in you, your body, other than filtering it, will put it to use. And it's the same as this. It doesn't need to be broken down. It's also worth mentioning at that point when you mentioned about open wounds and topical, if you like. We do also have, and I've only got a mini tube with me, a sample tube of the skin gel called Renew
Yeah.
28, and so it's essentially all it is this in a suspended gel so that you can apply it topically. And so externally, around pain, I mean, it is marketed as a beauty product. It's called Renew 28 because at our optimum, skin cells turn over every 28 days. And
Yeah.
so, as anyone who's interested in beauty knows, if you can proliferate skin cell turnover, you're obviously going to maintain healthier skin.
Hmm.
Um, but thankfully, as we found over I think it's been on the market for about 9 years, the Renew 28 gel, is that it's got many applications, and one of which being around pain, and discomfort. And so what we see is that, and Joe experienced from using this gel externally as well, is that it goes to work very fast. It doesn't get as deep. It doesn't go to the root cause, as you mentioned with the supplement, but it will interact with the localized blood flow and the pain receptors wherever it's supplied, and so you witness pain relief where it's been applied, and it also obviously enhances that skin cell turnover rate so that you heal and recover
Hmm.
and see benefits externally. So yes, when we introduce people to this, I try and encourage them to have a experience with both products, because even if you don't feel the inner workings, like the internal responses to the supplement, we know it is going to work from the minute you use it. You just might not outwardly feel it. But if you've got the gel as well, and you apply it to your face or some scar tissue or an injury or whatever, you'll probably see that go to work very quickly. And then well,
Hmm.
if that's doing that topically, what must the supplement be doing internally?
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm super curious. You might not know the answer to this, but um, you mentioned when you put the gel on that it's very localized because it only goes to a local part of your body. And if you apply the context in obviously ingesting it,
Mm.
it would. You mentioned it's not localized if you ingest it because it gets pushed into your bloodstream. But then, how do you have to have like a dose level that you need to reach in order to kind of um, populate your whole system? So because it kind of it would travel, wouldn't it? So
Yeah,
it's kind
yeah,
of like,
I know where you're
you know what I
going with
mean?
this, and yes, I know what you mean. So firstly, it's worth mentioning you can't overdose on this. You can't be allergic to this. As I said, every human on the planet won't respond. I mean, it can promote a detox reaction sometimes in people because that's and that, although might not be pleasant, is an example of what this is doing. This upregulates glutathione production by 800%, for example. Nevertheless,
Wow.
I'm going off topic here, and I could go into the studies that show you all of this. But no, to go back to your original question, um, so there's a dosage guideline that we would say that a maintenance dose for just every day
Mhm.
is a 60 ml. It comes with a little shot glass, a 60 ml shot in the morning, a 60 ml shot in the evening. You can do more than that, and often people with pronounced health challenges will.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's the maintenance dose. And with the skin gel, obviously, you just apply it liberally, however you like. I would say that this is very, very, very like minute. So you can't obviously see these molecules. They're molecules. It looks like water when you consume it, but in a single drop, there's estimated. This is the wrong notepad. I've got a different notepad. I think it's something like 1 trillion molecules in a single drop of ASEA Redox.
Wow.
So there's and this is obviously worth mentioning. It's so infinitesimal, like this, the size that we're referring to here. Cells, are tiny. Everything's made of cells, and yet you can't see them. But these are the molecules that can penetrate the cell wall and get into the cell. So we're talking, very minute molecules, and so there's a lot in every single. If you take 60 mil, it's a fair amount of these molecules going in. Even though a lot of people will drink more than that when they really want to, what's the word I'm looking at? Expedite results.
Mhm. I'm want to go back to your friend Joe,
Yes.
who lost a movement in his lower limbs. From Was it Joe who lost?
Yeah, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. Have there been anything that people have noticed in terms of where perhaps the spinal cord hasn't been broken but has been damaged, that they've noticed enhancements in the mobility of people who have previously lost their limb movement? Is that
Well,
something?
it's
I
it's
might maybe going a bit too far in the context
no,
of.
no, but I love questions like this, because I have a kind of like way of answering this that I hope will encourage people to do what I've done, which is go on a bit of a learning journey. Firstly, I should say with Joe, he was given a prognosis when he left hospital that he would. What was the description? He said he should expect to potentially over the next 10 years regain around about, I think he said, 5%, movement or feeling in his lower limbs. But this is a process over 10 years.
Mhm,
And he went, and obviously after being on ASEA, and Joe's been on ASEA now for over a year, I'd say.
mhm.
um, he's been measured as experiencing more than 10% in just a number of months. So I'm not saying
Wow.
that's purely ASEA. It's nothing to do with ASEA, of course. It's his body, of course, but
Yeah.
he's experienced better results than he was expected to receive in a decade, in a number of months. So that's one thing that it's helped with. And there are, I mean, again, I can go very deep, or I can at least share some studies around gene expression. So, for example, we've done a double-blind placebo-controlled trial with Torre Labs, who do a lot of the work for Ancestry.com to measure
Mhm,
gene expression. And again, it goes very deep into gene pathways and things like NRF2 pathways and all of this. But when you follow these gene transcription factors and pathways, some relate to spinal injury and spinal mobility. And so you can see that actually there's categorical evidence that gene expression is improved on ASEA Redox in certain measured and marked genes. And some of those pathways linked to things such as spinal health, or mobility, and linked to all sorts of manner of different things. And one of which is the NRF2 pathway, which is obviously very important. So yeah, there's that. And then the second part of this answer, I know it's a bit of a long-winded
no, I
answer.
think this is fascinating. I think we could talk for hours on this because there's
I could,
so many
I
questions.
definitely could. I don't know if everyone wants to listen to it or not, but there you go. But no, sorry, going back to my original point. Whenever anyone's got a specific request, because I won't ever prescribe this as a drug or a treatment for anything, I'll just say, look, this will empower your body. I encourage people to go to two places. One is, if you've got Facebook, a Facebook group called ASEA Healthy Self.
Okay,
And
I'll
that
put this in
Facebook
the
group,
notes.
yeah, please do. It's got 213,000 members currently. It's obviously growing as the company grows. And it's just a testimonial site. So people don't try and do anything other than just share their experiences there. But if you go onto that page, because it's been around for some time now, you can type into the search bar spinal, or anything. Think of a health challenge that you may have, and there'll be somebody somewhere around the world that is wanting to share their experiences and what they've been through and how it's benefited them, that you can read and even reach out to, because most people are happy to share and talk more about it. So that's one thing I would say. And then the second thing is completely independent of the company ASEA. You've probably heard of PubMed, and most people,
Yes.
especially those with a medical or scientific understanding, have heard of PubMed. www.pubmed.gov, International Library for Scientific Literature and Publications. And you can search in PubMed redox signaling. That's the area of science that this sits in. But you get lost. There's over 600,000
Mhm.
now studies or trials on what redox signaling is. But you can also search redox signaling and cancer, for example, or redox signaling and diabetes, whatever it is. And although this won't tell you anything of ASEA, what it will do is if you can read the material, and it's sometimes quite hard to comprehend, but it will show you what role redox signaling plays in that disease or illness or health condition. So if you know redox signaling is responsible for this within cancer or whatever, then you draw your own conclusions as to, well, if an increase in redox molecules would do this. Do you see what I mean? Now,
Yeah.
I'm asking people to join the dots themselves there, but there is an element of that needed here because we won't tell you it will do X, Y, or Z. It's up to you to kind of think that for yourself and then give it a try.
Going to the back to the fact that it's enabler, which is my next question, is that in the context of drug delivery and drug discovery, I kind of want to flip it. Is that because it amplifies the communication channels that you've got in your body already, is there an opportunity for the quantity of drugs that are prescribed to be reduced, or for the product to demonstrate that actually it the negative impact of that drug, because it's amplifying the signaling pathways,
Mm.
isn't it? So if you're having a negative benefit from that drug, that it amplifies, it brings that to light faster,
Yeah,
to know that
unfortunately.
that drug is not suitable for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately for some people that is the case, isn't it? And I'm a massive advocate, a seer aside of, as I've talked about with the social prescribing element, of trying to find natural, holistic solutions to problems before needing to turn to pharmaceuticals. The
Absolutely.
less pharmaceuticals I can introduce to me, the better. That's how I see
Yeah,
it.
I agree.
But we've seen many, many instances of people, yes, witnessing how their body absorbs because what's the expression with nutrition, and it's true of medication as well, it's not what you put in, it's what you absorb. People take glutathione, which is an antioxidant, as a supplement.
Mhm.
If you only absorb 10% of it, it's not doing you that much use. That's why I'm big with ASEA on antioxidants, because it upregulates the body's own production of glutathione, which then does get put to use. So
Yeah,
yeah, we've seen many people lessen their need for medication after being put on
or
a series
supplement.
or supplement. Yes, yeah, because and the body's an amazing machine. It can do a lot more than you probably give it credit for
Mhm.
when powered correctly, and you don't necessarily need to rely on X, Y, and Z because you didn't when you were a toddler or when you were in your teens, and then suddenly you realize, oh, I've got a deficit of this or this. It's maybe the body not doing what it used to be capable of, but that's what this is hopefully enabling you
Mhm.
to achieve. So yeah, that's what we've seen. There was another point I was going to say, but it's left me now. But yeah, I'm a big advocate, as we've mentioned, around, and I think we discussed this off record about how Western culture, if you like, we maybe are a bit reactive, wait for something to present, then go and search for a cure. There aren't cures. It's not a cure. It's something that will maybe help you overcome that, but it often leads to a side effect or another, thing being
Mhm.
presented, and you're dealing with that as well, as we've mentioned. Whereas prevention, as you know, prevention is better than cure. However, as I've said to you, cure is sexier than prevention, isn't it? People love to just think there's one pill that can just fix everything.
Mhm.
Invariably,
But
that's not.
I think the key thing on this one is you're in leveraging the power of your own internal super
Exactly.
system that has had millions of years of evolution to demonstrate that it is effective, and that it won't do, it's not likely to do itself harm, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. So it's got far more clinical trials from
Yeah,
an
exactly.
evolutionary perspective than any drug on the planet. So it's really leveraging your system to allow it to do its thing. What are the big challenges here in the UK, to get it to market,
Okay,
from your
so
perspective?
yeah, so from my perspective, one of the bigger challenges is without wanting to stereotype people or sound dismissive, but it's kind of like conditioning, like kind of social conditioning, as we've mentioned.
Mhm.
I think, not there's a growing number, and I think more and more people are being aware of the importance of preventative health, and and doing things before and getting ahead of what's to come. But we
Mhm.
are still guilty to some degree of relying very heavily on the NHS, knowing that it'll always be there for us. So if something happens, don't worry, they'll fix me. And
Mhm.
getting people to think, well, why wait for that thing to come? Yes, many people do find this as a treatment for something they're dealing with, but once you've experienced it and you know what this does in terms of preventative health, you probably want to continue with it, as I do. The other thing is just the way it's brought to market. When this was first, kind of unveiled and launched in America. Firstly, it's worth mentioning that the founder of this company, Verdis Norton, had no intention of bringing it to market himself or launching a company as we now represent. It was on the table to be sold to a big pharmaceutical company. But Verdis Norton realized that if sold, it probably wouldn't have made it to the light of day. It was probably going to get shelved. And that was via the conditions of the sale. It was withdraw it from the test group, withdraw it from people who know of this so that we can potentially, and this is just all speculation, of course, we can't know,
Mhm.
but that's what he decided not to take a chance on. So he walked away from a very, very big deal, of course, to
Mhm.
bring it to market himself. At 67, he came out of retirement and founded this company with his own money. And so that's why it's
Wow.
taken, yeah, this is why it's taken so much time. We're not backed by a
It's
big,
another Kentucky Fried Chicken story, but for the good of people rather than for the
yeah,
detriment.
yeah, another Colonel Sanders. Hey, but yeah, so he, and so this is it. This is why we're not backed by a multi-billion-dollar, pharmaceutical company, and why it's taken time to grow into 35 countries worldwide.
Yeah.
ASEA have now done over $1 billion in sales in the last year,
Wow.
but still, it's still small comparatively to where it will be, and other, big biotechs, etc. And so yeah, and it also needs representation. This is why I said I'm looking for people in the UK that can learn about this, understand it, and help me drive the growth of it,
Mhm.
because it doesn't do well just sat on shelves. People walk past this bottle going, well, what the bleeding hell's that? Cell signaling supplement. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't really resonate, or people don't know what it is. So it needs advocacy. It needs somebody to speak on its behalf and share the inevitable answers to questions that are going to come when that's introduced to you. So that's the biggest challenge, and it mainly stems around education, I suppose, and information. And that's
Mhm.
where, thankfully, I find most of my passion, because this is my light reading for
Redox justice.
when I'm not on a call with you. This is just all about the redox biology. So yeah,
I love that, and I'm super excited about, being a scientist. In my background is how we can use this to really empower people to change the health state of the nation, for those that are really struggling with chronic conditions or acute conditions where recovery is hampered in whatever way, and also for those that in the performance space want to enhance their performance,
yeah,
and be far better at what they do. Take the sports industry, by using what's inherently part of our own system. So I'm so excited about it. Jamie, I know we've talked about redox a lot, but that's why I really wanted you to come on the show. Um,
appreciate
what advice would you give to anybody who wants to learn more about this? What would you say to anyone who's struggling with a chronic condition, thinks it could be they've got the power within their own body and mind to fix it, and they want to learn more about this?
Yeah, I would say reach out. I'm no salesman, so I will spend as long as needed with any individual or group that I can present to give the quality information somebody needs to learn more first, and then obviously make a decision to give it a try. But one of the things ASEA do offer is a 30-day money back, empty bottle money back guarantee. So you can actually try it, even for we do encourage people to give their body that time that I mentioned earlier. So 90 days is kind of the time that we would say
Hmm.
90% of people see results, understand what this is doing after 90 days. Most people are a lot quicker than that, of course. I was sooner than that. Everybody I've introduced has probably seen results quicker than that. But to just give it that time, because you are initiating a process, and your body needs time to obviously, enact that process and see the results. But no, is to reach out to me. Like I say, you can see at the bottom my contact details. LinkedIn's obviously a good place to get me, but I'm happy to share emails and phone numbers if you'd like me to read those out or anything like that.
I'll read them out. So just go to Jamie Thomson on LinkedIn. You can find him there, Thomson, and Jamie, Jamie, or visit him at jamieThompson.redoxlifescience.com or supersportsouthwest.com, and that'll all be in the show notes as well. So do reach out to Jamie. Jamie, honestly, I've had so much fun. I know we didn't even get to the 5 pillars of brain health, but I'd love to come have you back on the show. I'm looking forward to trying this and seeing the benefits for myself, because I know we haven't done that yet, and catching up with you.
I appreciate
my journey and any other journeys that people have had.
And I will say, just finally before we wrap up, just if it's of interest, in speaking with Danielle Matthews from the US, who obviously had her brain injury, I put it to her that maybe that she could come on if you would like to speak with her also. So she's
absolutely. I'd love to have her on to share her brain health journey and the recovery that she went to through the intervention that she took using this particular product. It'd be super helpful and super insightful, and really looking forward to staying connected and working with you. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Oh no, you're most welcome. Remember, everyone, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. You are not stuck with the brain you have, or indeed with the body that you have. And Jamie's been here to show us how kindly talking about the Redox product. Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like and share this episode and leave a review on my website or on Apple Podcasts. If you're looking for opportunities to optimize your brain health or unchain your pain from a past trauma, make sure you visit my website, www.ruthmaryallen.com, and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get 10% off all programs. And always remember, you are not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to make it better. You have the power to unchain your pain and optimize your brain power and performance so that you can win back energy and time doing what you love.